Hi, and welcome to the latest episode of History You Didn't Know But Should. I'm Ray.
And I'm Chris.
And today we're going to Chatham County, North Carolina, and back to the Revolutionary era. And we're going to look at a place where the Deep River and the Haw River meet to form the Cape Fear River. And of course, the Cape Fear River runs all the way down through Wilmington and opens up into the Atlantic Ocean. And Chris, I must say that before you recommended this particular episode on Mermaid Point, I'd never heard of Mermaid Point before. And as a North Carolinian, I feel like there's something deeply wrong with that.
You know, I think it's first of all, it's really important for people who live in North Carolina to know that there is so much history. I know that you and I have talked about doing some episodes on some of the folklores of North Carolina. We've thought about doing the Beast of Bladenboro. And I know that there is, what was it? Somebody said that Bigfoot lives in the Uwharrie Mountains near Asheboro. Yeah. And I think that there's some similarity to the Loch Ness Monster that's living in Lake Norman. So, you know, all of these different things are coming around. And Ray, I mean, you've just gotta, when you find out something, you've just got to do some research about it. And it's just really interesting. And I don't know if I was having a little mermaid moment or whatever, but when I found out about the Mermaid Point, I wanted to bring it up from under the sea and to allow it to become part of our wonderful podcast that we do.
Yeah, I don't think I could fit that many references in one sentence as you just did. But the Cape Fear River, for those who maybe don't know, the Cape Fear River, like I said, it really runs from Wilmington all the way up past through Fayetteville, up toward Raleigh almost, and out west. I mean, of course, we're talking about Chatham County, so we're talking about sort of the western part of the state, right?
Yeah, it goes. I mean, there's actually I don't know if it's still around, but, you know, I did my education at Campbell University, and Campbell is near Lillington, Lillington, North Carolina. It's a funny little thing. If there's any Campbell alum who are listening to this, you know, we used to call Campbell the UCLA of the East. The University of Campbell between Lillington and Anger, North Carolina. So there you go for that. But there's a Mermaid Point restaurant that is in Lillington. And because you are right, because the Cape Fear River actually forms from the Deep River and the Haw River. And, you know, as it kind of comes down, as you mentioned, it joins the sea near Bald Head Island. And I mean, Ray, we've heard of stories of finding like shark teeth and a lot of other types of things all the way up to that point. So I'm not the science geography guy and about how all of that has kind of come together, but, you know, it's just fascinating how the state of North Carolina, I think, continues to change. And, you know, how today you learn about Mermaid Point, but you also can go exploring and hiking, and you can still come across some really unique traits about things way back when. And I know we're going back to Mermaid Point, which is the Revolutionary time, but some people actually said that Cape Fear, the name Cape Fear River, came from the 16th century with historian explorers. I think it was Grenville and even John White, and that they called it Cape Fear because they kept wrecking their ships as they were trying to maneuver up the Cape.
Yeah, and I remember in the 90s, there was a movie called Cape Fear. I think it was a horror movie of some sort. And I remember thinking back then, you know, well, that's an interesting parallel between the Cape Fear River and, of course, the movie Cape Fear. And of course, the waters off the coast of North Carolina are often referred to as the graveyard of the Atlantic, because how many ships over the decades have met their end there off the coast of North Carolina.
Yeah, but I mean, come on. I mean, this is not the place that we're expecting to go where we're going to find mermaids. I mean,
right. No, not in Chatham County. No,
not in Chatham County. And the last time I saw any mermaids, I think, was at the Ripley's Aquarium down in Myrtle Beach, where they've got mermaids swimming in the tanks with the sharks and all of that. So I don't know if we're going to, you know, Chatham County is in the history of North Carolina because, according to folklore, that was the one place you could go and could find yourself some mermaids if you were interested.
Well, we go back to 1740, the year 1740. There were four brothers, or no, excuse me, not four brothers, four Scotchmen, right? Who came to what is today Chatham County and purchased some land along the where the Haw and Deep rivers combine to form the what we call today the Cape Fear River. These guys were a guy called Neil McNeil, James McLaughlin, Duncan Campbell, and Hector McNeil. And they came and they bought this land or some land there where the two rivers meet, and they formed the town of Lockville, which I don't believe is still there, is it?
No, because we don't want to ruin this story before we get to the end, but
I don't think it's still there.
Due to some, things that happened.
I don't think it's still there. But they eventually meet up with a guy called Ambrose Ramsey, and he seems to be something of a businessman who sees some potential for some business here.
Well, I mean, you got to think about this guy, Ramsey. I mean, he understands what's happening. And Ray, I mean, we can look at all of history. And whenever you are starting a town, there's going to be three main things that you need to have. You need to have some aspect of schooling. You need to have a church, but you've got to have a tavern. Those are the three absolute necessities that people want in a town. And this guy's thinking, well, if all of these people are coming, I've got an opportunity to make some money. And the best way I can make some money is I'm going to open up a tavern. And he just so happened to open the tavern right there on the banks of the Deep River. And so his place is booming. I mean, he's got people, of course, because to get away from the house, where do you want to go? You can't go to Chili's. You can't go to Applebee's. So the place you're going to go is to Ramsey's Tavern. And evidently, there was some activity that happened in the tavern. Not quite sure what happened, but whatever was going on in the tavern allowed them to kind of begin thinking that the existence of mermaids were real, because when they left the tavern, that's when the mermaids started to appear.
Yeah, and there was a sandbar, is my understanding. There was a sandbar there. And when these people would leave the tavern, and it is interesting that they didn't see the mermaids going into the tavern. They only saw the mermaids when they were leaving the tavern.
Once again, something's going on in the tavern.
Going on in that tavern. There's something in the water in the tavern there. But when they would leave, they would allegedly see mermaids. And we're talking about all sorts of people, including soldiers fighting in the American Revolution, and even British soldiers who were under Cornwallis, who were staying there following the Guilford Courthouse, the Battle of Guilford Courthouse. And they said they would see these mermaids sitting out there on the sandbank, brushing their hair. Of course, there's no discussion where they got the brushes from, but brushing their hair in the water there in the river, and I guess sunning on the sandbar there. But I mean, I gotta say that takes some imagination. But I guess if imagination has some assistance,
Well, and I think, so there's two things here. I mean, first of all, as you mentioned, multiple people saw this. So it's not just one person who is speaking, that this is going on, because Ramsey could easily have used that to drum up business. But the other thing that we have to is, how can you even come up with something like this in Chatham County? It's so far away from the Atlantic Ocean, and mermaids, whether you believe in the reality of mermaids or you don't believe in the reality of mermaids, mermaids were known as creatures of the sea, and they were established in these large bodies of water, such as the ocean, a lot of salt water, things of that nature. And I remember doing the research that I read something that said, well, the reason you found them in Chatham County is because the water there was better than it was in the ocean. And so they would go up to Chatham County to the Deep and the Haw River, where they would wash their hair. And evidently they were washing their hair and getting the salt out, because evidently salt you and I really have no idea to be talking about this, but salt is evidently bad for the hair. And so they would brush it up there through the Haw and Deep River because it would make it more shiny and beautiful. Though, Ray, have you ever stepped foot in the Cape Fear River? Is there anything that can really be shiny and beautiful out of the Cape Fear?
I don't think so. And no, I have never stepped foot in the Cape Fear River because I've been near it enough to know, no, I do not want to step foot in the Cape Fear River. You know, the Cape Fear River is a very important river in North Carolina, has been so since early settlement of North Carolina, where a lot of the early settlers coming into North Carolina did settle around what is today the mouth of the Cape Fear down there in, I think it's New Hanover County, Wilmington area. And of course, many settlers came up. They came up the Cape Fear, settling at places like Cross Creek, which is now part of Fayetteville, North Carolina. So the Cape Fear River is a very important river in North Carolina. And apparently, it wasn't just the people who thought so, it was the mermaids who thought so as well. A great place to wash their hair among the catfish, alligators, and water moccasins.
Yeah, and for our listeners, if they want to learn more about the Cape Fear River, they can take a journey back in time to our archives, and they could find a episode we did about Elwell's Ferry, which kind of talked about, you know, one of the ferry systems as far as the Cape Fear. And in that episode, we talked a lot about how it was an economic driver of North Carolina, and it really established, you know, commerce throughout North Carolina. So that's just a little throwback to one of our previous podcasts that we did. But Ray, you know, as we think about this idea of the mermaids, what could have convinced these people to spin a yarn or to spin a tale unless there's some truth there? I guess that's one of the mysteries of North Carolina.
Yeah, I think it is. And you know, I didn't see any explanation as to what may have caused this other than alcohol being involved in this. But you know, I think there may be some explanations that that we need to consider. One, of course, being that Mr. Ramsey trumped this up, and you know, because there were a lot of people liquored up, you know, maybe he was able to get people to believe it or to repeat the story. One thing I wonder about, if maybe there were some women out there on the sandbars, maybe once or twice, and so it sort of and some people saw them, and the story about mermaids just sort of cascaded from there. I have no historical evidence to back that up. It's just something I wonder about. You know, is this a case of just a bunch of people who are coming out of a tavern, not tavern, nice and liquored up, you know, making stuff up? Or is this a case where maybe there were some women out there on the sandbar brushing their hair, etc., and then maybe because of the alcohol or whatever, they jumped to the conclusion that these women were mermaids? I don't know. That's the best I can do.
Well, and I think that that's how a legend is made. A legend is made through storytelling. And usually there is something, the old game telephone, where you tell one person something and then the next person, and it blows up into this something totally different than what the original intent was. And I think you make a really good observation there, that we do know that the Deep and the Haw rivers were used for a variety of purposes, especially back during this time, for washing and for cleansing and for using it for cooking and all kinds of things. So there's no reason to think that people did not use the river for purposes that were normal, but it made a good story in the tavern. And in the tavern, everybody likes a good story. And then it just fed from there. It's kind of how, like, the Loch Ness Monster, as we mentioned earlier, or Bigfoot, you know, those things are still in existence today. People still believe. I saw an article not too long ago that they saw Bigfoot just the other day. And what I think happens is that legend has become so popular that you just can't discount it, even though there's no historical accuracy or evidence to support it. So it just makes for a really good story. But unfortunately, there's no mermaids that are still being seen today. You know, that it kind of dies out, and there's a specific reason as to why it dies out, isn't there?
Yeah, the town of Lockville, which is where Mr. Ramsey built his tavern, doesn't succeed. It fails. It doesn't really draw people like he hoped it would. Haywood, which is nearby, sort of draws more people and is more successful. And actually, it was in the 1800s that there was a flood, which, of course, when you're dealing with the Cape Fear River, both of us live near the Cape Fear River, and it is, it's always up or down. It can flow over its banks very easily, right? And this tavern was destroyed in this flood. And interestingly enough, to maybe give credence to the idea that alcohol was involved in the sighting of these mermaids, it was about that time that the sighting of the mermaids ended.
Yeah, and I think that's the kind of where the story kind of runs off the history pages, if you will, because it is pretty sad. We see a town actually dry up. We see it fail, even though there's flooding that comes. And maybe it starts putting these locks and these dams. And I think, wasn't it true? You mentioned the Battle of Guilford Courthouse a few minutes ago, but if I can understand this correctly, so Cornwallis, he left and he makes his way to where Ramsay's Tavern was. But didn't they try to flood the river or to block the river or something to keep the troops from coming after Cornwallis? Do you remember that?
Yeah, and that was when they were heading toward Wilmington, when they decided to move east and go toward Wilmington, because of course after Guilford Courthouse they head to Wilmington to sort of do some recovery after the very heavy losses at Guilford Courthouse. But yes, he does try to do some flooding there, using a dam technique to flood the area so the Americans or the Patriots couldn't follow them down.
So we do not have that sandbar there anymore.
No, sandbar gone, the tavern's gone, it's all gone.
But you can still see the intersection between the Haw and the Deep River where, Cape Fear goes. But it's still an interesting place to go because, once again, in North Carolina, it's one of those, I didn't know that, but I should, because it makes for a great story, whether you're in the tavern or whether you're at home, and you just need a good story to tell. There's always the story about how mermaids made their way to central North Carolina.
Yeah, it's an interesting story, certainly a fascinating story. Exactly the kind of story, in fact, that this podcast, I think, was initially created to talk about. I think sometimes we talk about people and events that are maybe a little bit more well known, and that's fine. But History You Didn't Know But Should is all about these unique little stories that most people don't know anything about. People even living in the area, don't know much about these things. But that's what this podcast is about.
Yeah, and I think it's a good podcast because it kind of reminds us the importance of folklore and legend, and it talks about the history of North Carolina, but it also brings us back to something that all people love to talk about, and that's mermaids. And I think that Disney did a really good job in bringing our attention to mermaids. And I was always sad by that movie, Ray. I don't know if you ever saw the movie, but I was always sad because the Little Mermaid never got into college.
Oh, what a travesty.
Yeah, her GPA was under the C.
That's bad. That's bad.
I enjoyed this podcast, Ray.
I did right up there until that point.
You think this one might be at sea level, or will it be a little bit better?
No, I think we were floating, but you just may have hit bottom.
Hit the sea bottom.
Yeah. So I hope our listeners enjoyed this episode of History You Didn't Know But Should. I think Chris enjoyed it a little too much.
I was just fishing for a compliment.
There you go. There you go. You can always find us on Spotify, Twitcher, Sounder FM, or wherever you get your podcast from. We do encourage you to share this episode with your family and friends. Share it on social media, whatever. You can find us on social media, Facebook and Twitter. Until next time, I'm Ray.
And I'm Chris.
Talk to you later.